And we're joined by John Hardie, Deputy Director of the Russia Program at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Good evening.
Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for joining us. So, let's start with something we've just shown in our last news bulletin. AfD is doing pretty well, despite scandals rocking the party. Do voters of AfD have no problems with the spying allegations?
Well, they certainly should. I don't think it's acceptable for a political party of any Western country to be beholden to Moscow, even if it's just certain members within that party. Although over the years, I think we've seen that Moscow is quite friendly with the AfD, has even, dare I say, funneled them some cash over the years, helped them in certain elections, and certainly with certain members of the party, seems to have put them on its roster of agents within the European Union.
Mm-hmm.
Sir, let me just ask you: do we know the scale of this sort of phenomenon? Because Alexander De Croo said his country's intelligence services indeed discovered some sort of meddling and sort of foreign influence, the pro-Russian foreign influence. But I mean, do we know how big is this phenomenon? Yeah.
I don't think we in the public have a certain idea of the scale, although we do know this has been Russia's bread and butter for quite a long time, developing agents within what it sees as hostile countries, paying them to do its bidding. And we know that the AfD is not the only party, and Germany is not the only country in which members of parliament or other officials have been suborned to work on behalf of the Russians. So I suspect that as authorities delve deeper into this, they'll dig up more suspects and more leads, and we'll start to unravel the extent of Russia's influence operations.
Right, there's something we can observe here, but whether it's correct. Now, so only yesterday, Belgian police entered home and office of one of MEP's assistants, actually the home of Guillaume Pradois, and he's an assistant of Marcel de Graaf from the far-right Dutch party Forum for Democracy. But previously, the very same gentleman was working for Alexander Krach, the leader of the aforementioned AfD. So do we see any sort of a pattern here?
Yeah, I think you're right to draw that connection, and I would say more broadly, Russia historically has worked a good bit with parties and individuals on the fringes on both sides of the political aisle. Obviously during the Soviet Union, it was the left. I think these days it's really more the far right type of folks who tend to gravitate toward Russia or be more amenable to doing Russia's bidding. Or at least, Russia sees them as useful and divisive forces within their countries or within the European Union. And so even if they're not, say, doing Russia's bidding overtly, Moscow sees benefit in pumping them up and by fueling the money or other sorts of support.
Right. And speaking about money and European Parliament, we already had a scandal involving Kaya Kaili and the sort of the Qatari funding, and then Roberta Metsola introduced some measures, including disclosing, right, what is, I believe, some of their income that were supposed to stop that from happening in the European Parliament, but it seems that it's still happening. So, what does it say about the European Parliament and some of the measures that are in place that are supposed to limit these kinds of activities?
Right. In my opinion, transparency is paramount, and it's not just about the finances of government officials, although that is important. It's also about the transparency of our financial system more broadly. And I think in this case, Europe is actually a bit ahead of my own country, the United States, although we have taken important steps to catch up. But we need transparency so that when Moscow is trying to funnel money through shell companies or other sort of covert schemes, authorities are able to shine a spotlight on that, and they don't get stonewalled by layers of non-transparent corporate schemes, and so they're able to follow those leads and follow the trail back to the Kremlin.
All right, precisely. So let me reverse this question Sally just asked. What does it tell us about Russia? Because it seems it's so much harder to trace its connections back to the Kremlin. It wasn't the case of the Middle East.
Well, I think first, the spate of influence operations that have been uncovered within Europe says something about Russia's intentions to destabilize and divide Europe. That's something that's not new. I think that the recent influence campaigns that European and U.S. officials have warned about, I think, reflect Russia's desire, heightened by the war in Ukraine, to deter the West. In some cases, these sabotage operations have taken place in sites related to support for military aid for Ukraine. In other cases, I think they're just trying to sow chaos or deter Western governments. But I think another thing that's important to remember is the Kremlin often operates through kind of looser networks of agents, in some cases run by, say, oligarchs or through companies or obviously the intelligence services. And it's not always a top-down thing where Putin is saying, "Hey, do this, do that." His officials or his networks of proxies know what he wants them to do, and they kind of operate on that initiative in an entrepreneurial way. So you're right; it can be tough to kind of discern where exactly the Kremlin's direct involvement stops and ends. But regardless, I think Putin obviously bears responsibility for the acts of aggression that have been going on in Europe in the past few months and more broadly.
Right. Antony Blinken just signed this cooperation agreement with Czech Foreign Minister, right, regarding the exchange of information and sort of trying to combat the hybrid warfare, the misinformation campaigns conducted by Russia. So how shall sort of politicians go about it, or the governments go about it? What is the strategy here? Because I mean, how do you target these people?
Well, certainly shining a spotlight on disinformation is important. I think really since 2014, and especially the Russian interference in the U.S. election in 2016 and a variety of other European elections, Western governments have woken up to the threat of Russian disinformation and taking more concerted efforts to, like I said, shine a spotlight on that disinformation. I think what we need to do a better job of is going one step further and actually taking the fight back to the Kremlin. So this means offensive information operations, not peddling lies like Russia, but using the truth to put the Russians on the back foot. That's both within the Russian Federation and in countries that they would consider their backyard, like Central Asia, Eastern Europe, etc.
So that's the strategy. John Hardie, Deputy Director of the Russia Program at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, was our guest tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you.